This episode of GMspiration is brought to you by the Seelie Nursery, where your dreams become reality. That isn't a metaphor. Your dreams will literally come alive. Want to find a flowering plant that eats nightmares and produces soda? Perhaps a cacti that only pricks those who lust for money? What about a creeping ivy that converts sunlight into silver? All these and more at the Seelie Nursery. Please do not use real name with any staff at the Seelie Nursery. The nursery cannot be held accountable for anyone who loses their name while visiting their store. All purchases are non-refundable and you're advised to wear a mask. What do you think of when someone says a flower? For me, it would probably be a daisy. White petals, central yellow disc, and green supporting stem or pedicel. If you ask me to think about a more distinct looking flower, I might go for the Banksia flower, which is actually hundreds of flowers formed into a cone. If you ask for the strangest flower, I might say one of those corpse flowers, like the Titan Arum, a gigantic flower that smells of rotting meat in order to attract carrion insects for pollination. In this episode, we're going to delve into flowers to give you some inspiration for weird and fantastical flowers for your worlds. First up, definition time. Flowers are parts of plants that spread pollen. Some flowers, called perfect flowers, contain both male and female parts, the stamen and the pistil, respectively. Imperfect flowers contain only one. Some plants produce male and female imperfect flowers on the same plant, while others only produce one. Single-sex plants include the papaya, kiwi fruit, and the juniper, the berries of the latter of which are used to make gin. So let's do a very quick botany lesson on the parts of the flower. As always, please forgive my pronunciation. Many flowers are different, so I'm sticking with a general description. To start with, we have petals, generally colourful to visually attract pollinators and direct them to the centre of the flower. Then the stigma, the central protrusion that collects pollen from pollinators and delivers it to the pistil. Then you have the stamen, which holds the pollen to deposit onto the pollinators. Nectar is secreted to entice pollinators. It can come from various parts of the flower, but will be positioned so the pollinator touches the right areas. Pollinators can also collect pollen to eat. Bees, for example, collect nectar in their honey stomachs and pollen in their pollen sacs on their legs. The loose pollen that sticks to their bodies is what fertilizes the flowers. So this brings us back to the main reason for many flowers, to attract pollinators. So let's quickly run through some different types of pollinators. The most common, of course, are the bees, as mentioned before. I think I'll do a whole video on types of bees at some later stage. We also have other insects like flies, butterflies, beetles, ants, and wasps. Then we have bigger creatures, such as birds like the hummingbird or the Australian wattlebird. There are also bats, like fruit bats, aka flying foxes. In this image, you can see the tongue of an orange nectar bat reaching down to the nectar of the flower. Note how the stamen and stigma are pressed against the bat's head. Pollinators can also be much larger, including monkeys, dogs, and other animals. There are also non-biological methods of pollination, such as hydrophily, where pollen is spread by water, common for water plants, or amenophily, where it is spread by the wind, for plants such as wheat and other grasses. Let's talk a bit about some flowers specialized for specific pollinators. There are a few flowers that have the nickname corpse flowers. One is the Titan Arum, which is a fascinating plant. Most of the plant is a large tuber, from which it sprouts one single large leaf which has the appearance of a small tree. When it comes time to flower, it forms one giant flower. The scent is described as rotting flesh, and it is designed to attract carrion insects. Chemical analysis shows the scents include dimethyl trispholide, like Limburger cheese, dimethyl dispholide, garlic, trimethylphthalamine, rotting fish, isoveric acid, sweaty socks, benzyl alcohol, a sweet floral scent, phenol, like chloroseptic, and idol, like feces. Its larger petals appear red, and the tip of the flower gets the temperature roughly of a human body. All of this adds to the effect of the flower appearing like a large piece of rotting meat. The tuber can weigh up to 100 kilos or 220 pounds. Similar, we have another corpse flower, the Rafflesia Arnoldii, the world's largest flower at 1 meter or 3 foot 3 inches. What's unique about this plant is it does not have any leaves or even roots. It's a parasite, spreading through the host and only revealing itself when it flowers. In that way, it is very similar to a fungus. The leaves are reddish-brown, and that adds to the scent to make it appear as if it is rotting meat. Next, we have the Australian orchid, the Rhizanthella. This flower grows and blooms mostly underground. While the flower is at or around ground level, it is generally covered by leaf litter. This makes it the only flower to bloom in darkness. It is thought that it might be pollinated by termites
or perhaps any insect that moves through the leaf litter and happens to pollinate it. Next, we have the Hydnora africana. It is a parasite, like the Rafflesia Arnoldii. It grows on the roots of other plants until a fleshy flower emerges from the ground and emits the odor of feces to attract dung beetles and carrion beetles. The flower acts as a temporary trap for beetles to ensure they collect the pollen. Moving on to another interesting pollination method, we have figs. Some figs are pollinated by wasps that can either enter the fig, pollinating it and being absorbed, lay eggs in the fig, or make a small nest. The exact method depends on which of the hundreds of types of figs it is. Even more amazing, most wild figs have their own specific type of fig wasp that pollinates their specific species. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention carnivorous flowers, such as the Venus flytrap and the yellow pitcher plant that attract insects in order to kill them for sustenance. You might say to me, "Hold up, Mr. GMspiration, if that is your real name. Those aren't flowers." I would respond by asking you who you are and what are you doing in my house. Later, while discussing it with my therapist, I might say that even though it is not technically a flower, it is certainly flower-like. And if it looks like a flower, our players and readers are unlikely to be questioning, in that exact moment, the anatomy of the plant, especially if you have a plant appendage that appears like a flower to attract prey. Think of fictional plants like Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors. The mouth appears like a flower, but is probably an altered leaf, much like the Venus flytrap. For now, let's leave these in our inspiration platter so that we can include them in our fantastical flowers. I will say, looking at this photo of a Venus flytrap, have a look at how far it needs to bloom its flower to stop it from accidentally eating its own pollinators. Okay, fact dump done. Let's turn this into some usable statements. First, flowers attempt to move pollen from one flower to another. Second, many flowers attract pollinators by creating something the pollinator wants. Third, pollinators are not limited to insects. Fourth, flowers are highly specialized and will change their form based on their preferred pollinator. Fifth, as we are running this in a fantasy setting, the flowers can be much larger and more complex than in the real world. Sixth, as an addendum, pollen can be spread by non-biological means. So then, let's turn all this into some usable, fantastical flowers. So what if my target pollinator was something a bit different, like a human or a dwarf? I guess they would be attracted to food, maybe alcohol, maybe gold. So firstly, let's go with the Lilium medu, or more commonly, the Drunkard's Friend. This large flower has white petals that form a jug-like appearance. The flowers produce a nectar and fermenting microorganisms to create a sweet alcohol for human consumption. To protect the nectar from insects, it is formed within small liquid-filled beads half the size of a tennis ball, colloquially called shots, due to containing roughly a shot of liquid, about 40 ml or 1.5 ounces. To get the alcohol, one simply needs to reach into the flower and gently pluck the shot from the bottom of the jug. In doing so, the person's arm will touch the stamen and become coated in pollen. As the person moves from plant to plant, the pollen is spread each time they reach in, collecting more shots. So Lilium medu was fun to create. It was a bit of a challenge to think about how a flower would create alcohol that wouldn't end up filled with insects and bugs. At first, I thought perhaps the petals would be pressed tightly together, but that would make it visually unappealing for players to interact with. You give any player a closed space and they assume it's some sort of trap. In this case though, by creating these little balls filled with alcohol, not only do I give them something they can collect, but also something that they can then carry it in. This gets rid of the issue of players maybe not having anything to actually hold the liquid in, having to empty out water skins. It also means that they can be traded. The players might come across people trading these small shots of Drunkard's Friend as a precursor to coming across the flowers in the wild. Next fictional plant, the Rhizanthella argentum, or silver plums. These small underground plants grow in precious metal mines, most commonly silver. Their roots spread out hundreds of meters through the ground, collecting nutrients and precious metals. The latter, it forms into small beads inside the flower. The flower has a small iridescent glow, attracting dwarves who dutifully collect the beads, spreading the pollen from one flower to the next as they do. While the plant most often produces silver beads, it has been known to produce gold or platinum. In this example, I've taken the Rhizanthella, particularly that it grows underground. Instead of nectar, I've given it a precious metal that dwarves and humans might want to collect, and then I've given it petals that glow slightly so that it will attract people underground. The first two are pretty simple. They create something that's nice, that humans or dwarves will want, and then by collecting them, they spread it to the next flower. Let's create something a bit odder. The Orchidaceae cadaver, or corpse-eating flower. This plant is actually a parasite that grows off the roots of larger plants. It appears like a large fern, and the male and female plants are identical until they flower. Male flowers are about 6 inches or 15 centimeters long. They have long petals with blue around the edges and white in the center. The large stamens in the center make it look very similar to a lily. Most importantly, it produces a narcotic-like sweet, enticing scent that is described as joy or bliss by people who have smelt it. Those that are unaware of the danger of these flowers often approach it, leaning in to smell. If they disturb the stamen, they inhale the pollen, which quickly intoxicates them. The pollen is mixed with a hallucinogenic. This causes them to perceive the female flower as the thing they want most in the world. While the male plant produces multiple flowers, the female produces only one large flower, around 1.5 meters or 5 feet in diameter. It is heavily reinforced by strong leaves. Affected by the pollen of the male, creatures, be they human or otherwise, approach the female flower and crawl into the petals. The flower then closes, releasing various drugs to keep the creature in a state of intoxication. Now fertilized, the flower digests the creature that fertilized it in order to add additional nutrients to the fruit. The fruit of the corpse-eating flower is known to have significant health properties if you can get over the fact you may be eating some hapless person that just wanted to stop and smell the flowers. This one mixes the biology of the fig and the wasp, where some wasps pollinate and are then absorbed by the flower into the fruit. It also adds the narcotic or drug effect that we find in many plants, and also makes it dangerous. Something that if your players are not aware of, they might end up walking into a trap. Obviously, one of these isn't going to take out the whole party, unless you find a whole field of the female and male flowers. Next, we have the Calotropis nymphonia, or Oberon's crown. These miniature trees grow in areas of natural magic. With leaves that range in color from amber, brown, and gold, they attract the interest from sapient creatures such as humans and orcs. When Calotropis nymphonia flowers, it produces a unique flower structure. They are small, amber-colored bands dotted with milky white beads. These Oberon crowns are prized as jewelry by elves and can be easily plucked from the plant when fully developed. The bands carry a small amount of unique mana, which creates a minor magical field around the carrier. The mana acts as a pollen for other Calotropis nymphonia. Effectively, as the wearer moves through the forest, they are pollinating other Oberon's crowns. The luster of an Oberon's crown lasts for about 6 weeks, but they can be preserved with the right magics. For this one, I wanted to come up with something that was a bit different, far more peaceful, and had a bit of that fey or elvish magic to it. The Oberon's crowns are an interesting tidbit of the world, but you could foresee this as being something they could share with elves, or gifts that elves give people upon visiting their forest. A gift that also helps pollinate the forest? Classic elves. Next, we have the Triticum nyctinax, or snowweed. This is a large, thick-grown grass. When it flowers, it creates huge amounts of long, white, strand-like stamen that detach and are blown around by the wind. The moving stamen are used to pollinate the female parts of the flowers that are left attached to the grass. The volume of this stamen is so large that it creates masses of loose plant material that coat the landscape, earning it the name snowweed. While generally not a problem, plague proportions of snowweed have been known to bury whole towns. Prone regions will preemptively burn snowweed to keep the populations under control. Failure can cause havoc, and burn-off becomes impossible once the flowering starts, as it can quickly create wildfires. So for this one, I wanted something that was pollinated by the wind, or anemophily. As most real-world examples of this are grasses, I thought I would go in that direction. Grasses is also a good example of something that can spread quite quickly. If you've ever seen large amounts of loose grass, or loose seeds, or even loose pollen, you can see how they can quickly build up, causing issues for people moving around them. As I've blown this up to fantasy proportions, you could have situations where whole towns are covered by this weed. The players might arrive at a small village to find it half submerged, as the villagers work tirelessly to collect and bury the weed. Now, if you live in a part of the world which has bushfires, or wildfires, you might know how dangerous it is to have large amounts of dried grass around. This could cause a secondary issue for our players. where if they're not careful, or if they're throwing around fire spells, they inadvertently create one of these fires. You could also have a situation where they're simply cut off or forced to wade through huge amounts of this grass. Imagine waking up one day, opening your tent, and everything is covered in grass. You can't see the sky, there's this thin, white strands of grass. Makes a huge issue for navigation, for players getting around, and all because they picked the wrong time of year to explore. So those are my examples of my fantastic flowers, but you could make them even more fantastical. So what about flowers that attract pollinators by singing? They could even mimic bird songs, or maybe people. What about flowers the size of houses that use the residents to spread the pollen to other houses? You can imagine elves living in these large flower houses. By simply moving around and visiting other people in the village, they are spreading the pollen. This would be a good example of a symbiotic relationship between these flowers and the elves, very similar to the wasps and the figs. So what about flowers that look like animals, like deer? They could even detach from the plant, move around to find other flowers to pollinate. Your adventurers could be walking through a forest when they see a herd of deer, but as they approach, it appears they are actually living, moving flowers. You could also use these flowers to help exploring adventurers with much needed supplies. What if the nectar acts as healing potions? Or what if the flowers form the thing you need the most? All you need to do is reach in and get it. So to summarize, flowers often play the part of the medical MacGuffin in literature, something that people just need to get and return with.
Adventurer, I need you to collect 6 frost warts so that we can cure the burning illness affecting the princess.
That's fine. MacGuffins are a fantastic literary device. They're a fantastic thing for adventurers to find. After all, they need a goal to reach towards. But what if you could bring fantastical flowers into the world and make something unique and weird? Remember that time when our wizard, Bob the Magnificent, was nearly digested by that flower? I hope this episode has been of inspiration for some weird flowers you might bring into your own worlds. Thanks for listening to this episode of GMspiration. Be amazing, and remember to have fun.